Ruthless biker kicked a dog for fun. Unaware Keanu Reeves is the owner. When a ruthless biker kicked a dog for fun, he had no idea that the dog's owner was none other than Ethan Carter, a 45-year-old actor known for his intense action roles. What started as a peaceful afternoon walk would soon escalate into a dramatic confrontation, proving once again that you should never mess with a man's dog. The concrete walls of Brooklyn Heights trapped the morning heat around the bustling film set of Shadow Strike, the latest blockbuster Ethan was starring in. The air was thick with the scent of hot asphalt and the faint aroma of street food wafting from nearby vendors. Camera equipment littered the area, cables snaking across the ground like dormant serpents. "That's a wrap for this scene, folks," the director's voice cut through the cacophony of the set. "We'll take a 1-hour lunch break and meet back here for the next shoot." His announcement was met with a collective sigh of relief from the crew, who had been working tirelessly since dawn. As the crew began to disperse, their voices filled with excited chatter about lunch plans. A group gathered near the catering truck. "Hey, Ethan," one of them called out. "We're heading to that new deli on Atlantic Avenue. Want to join us?" Ethan Carter turned toward the voice, a friendly smile playing on his lips. However, his attention was quickly drawn to Max, the German shepherd who had been featuring in their scenes. The dog stood panting heavily in the heat, his tongue lolling out as he sought relief from the oppressive temperature. "You guys go ahead," Ethan replied, his eyes still on Max. "I think I'll take care of our four-legged friend here and give him a walk. He looks like he could use it." The dog handler, a lanky man in his late 30s with a clipboard tucked under his arm, stepped forward. "That's all right, Mr. Carter. I can take care of Max. It's my job, after all." Ethan held up a hand, his expression earnest. "I'd like to do it if that's okay. It'll help me bond with him for our upcoming scenes." He paused, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "Plus, I've always been curious about what it's like to own a dog, even if it's just for a short while." The dog handler hesitated, his brow furrowing slightly. Ethan quickly added, "Don't worry, we won't go far. I'll make sure he gets a snack and something to drink." After a moment's consideration, the dog handler nodded. "All right, Mr. Carter. Just be careful. Max is a sweetheart, but he can be a handful sometimes." With the handler's approval secured, Ethan set about preparing for their walk. The handler handed him a sturdy leash, a handful of plastic bags for waste collection, and a collapsible silicone water container. Ethan carefully secured the leash to Max's collar, his movements gentle and deliberate. He tucked the other items into the pockets of his leather jacket, patting them to ensure they were secure. Kneeling down to Max's level, Ethan spoke in a warm, friendly tone. "Are you up for a walk, buddy? Are you thirsty? Let's find a quiet place to rest." Max's tail wagged enthusiastically in response, his earlier signs of discomfort momentarily forgotten in the face of Ethan's attention. "I know you're thirsty," Ethan continued, noting the dog's continued panting. "Let's find you a water fountain. I'm sorry I don't have my water with me today." Standing up, Ethan turned to the remaining crew members. "See you all in an hour," he called out, giving a small wave. With that, he gently tugged on Max's leash, and the unlikely pair set off into the streets of Brooklyn Heights, leaving behind the controlled chaos of the film set for the unpredictable adventure that awaited them. Ethan and Max made their way through the sun-drenched streets of Brooklyn Heights, the midday heat reflecting off the pavement in shimmering waves. Max's panting had intensified, his need for water becoming more urgent with each passing minute. Ethan's eyes scanned the surroundings, searching for any sign of a public water fountain or a dog-friendly establishment. As they turned a corner, an imposing structure came into view. The sign above the door read, "Iron and Ash," its weathered letters suggesting a long-standing presence in the neighborhood. The unmistakable rumble of motorcycles filled the air, and a row of gleaming bikes stood parked across the entrance, like sentinels guarding a fortress. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene, his grip on Max's leash tightening instinctively. The biker bar exuded an aura of toughness and barely contained aggression, a stark contrast to the trendy cafes and boutiques that dominated most of Brooklyn Heights. Just as Ethan was considering moving on, a glint of metal caught his eye. There, nestled between two parked motorcycles, stood a public water fountain. Relief washed over him as he guided Max toward it. With practiced ease, Ethan retrieved the collapsible container from his pocket. He pushed the silicone sides out, forming a makeshift bowl, and filled it with cool water from the fountain. As Max lapped eagerly at the water, Ethan stepped aside, allowing another patron, a burly man with tattoos snaking up his arms, to use the fountain. While Max drank, Ethan took the opportunity to observe the steady stream of patrons entering and exiting the bar. Despite their similar attire, leather jackets, worn jeans, and heavy boots, their demeanors varied widely. Some swaggered in with cocky grins, while others moved with a wary alertness, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. To Ethan's surprise, several of the bikers acknowledged Max with unexpected warmth. The tattooed man who had used the fountain after them paused, a smile softening his weathered features. "Nice German shepherd you've got there," he commented, his voice gravelly but friendly. "People often misjudge them, you know. Kind of like they do with us bikers. Loyal to a fault, both of them, if you treat them right." Ethan nodded, appreciating the man's insight. "You're right about that," he replied. "There's often more than meets the eye." As they continued their conversation, a waitress emerged from the bar and took her place behind the hostess stand at the entrance. Her apron was slightly stained and crumpled, and she looked tired, but her face lit up when she saw Max. "Oh, what a handsome boy!" she exclaimed, approaching them. She knelt down, offering her hand for Max to sniff. The dog responded with a gentle lick, his tail wagging. The waitress laughed, scratching behind his ears. "He's such a good boy," she said, then leaned in toward Ethan, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Kinder than half the men inside, I'd wager." She chuckled at her own joke. Ethan smiled in response, appreciating her light-hearted demeanor. He emptied the remaining water from the bowl, folded the silicone container, and tucked it back into his pocket. "Thanks for the warm welcome," he said, giving her a friendly wave as he prepared to continue their walk. As they moved away from the bar's vicinity, Ethan's ears picked up the sound of raised voices. He turned to see the same waitress now engaged in a heated exchange with a group of 5 bikers. Her posture was defensive, but her voice was firm as she stood her ground. "I told you yesterday, your gang's not welcome here anymore," she was saying, her words carrying clearly across the parking lot. "After what happened last time, the boss was clear. You're banned." The bikers towered over her, their faces twisted with anger. One of them, a hulking man with a shaved head, took a menacing step forward. "Move aside, sweetheart," he growled, "or we'll move you ourselves." The situation was escalating quickly. Ethan hesitated, torn between the desire to help and his responsibility to keep Max safe. Just as he was considering intervening, a group of other bikers emerged from the bar. They quickly positioned themselves around the waitress, forming a protective barrier between her and the troublemakers. "You heard the lady," one of them said, his voice low and dangerous. "Time for you to leave." Recognizing the potential for violence and mindful of his promise to the dog handler, Ethan decided it was time to make a strategic retreat. He quietly led Max away from the scene, not wanting to draw attention to themselves. As they walked, Ethan couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and unease. The confrontation at the bar had revealed an undercurrent of tension in the neighborhood, one that he hoped wouldn't impact the rest of their outing. After walking several blocks away from the tense scene at Iron and Ash, Ethan and Max found themselves in a more tranquil part of the neighborhood. The streets here were lined with trees, their leaves providing welcome shade from the relentless sun. As they rounded a corner, a quaint cafe came into view. Its outdoor seating area, a haven of calm in the bustling city. The cafe's patio was spacious and inviting, with wrought iron tables and chairs scattered beneath a canopy of string lights that crisscrossed overhead. Even in the daytime, the lights added a touch of whimsy to the scene. A chalkboard sign near the entrance proclaimed the day's specials in colorful artistic lettering. Ethan paused, considering their options. The shaded patio seemed like the perfect spot to rest and grab a bite to eat while keeping Max comfortable. Making his decision, he approached one of the tables, carefully removing Max's leash with practiced ease. Ethan settled into one of the chairs, then pulled an extra seat alongside his own. He patted the seat, inviting Max up. "Come on, boy," he said softly. "You've earned a rest." Max didn't need to be told twice. With surprising grace for his size, the German Shepherd jumped up onto the chair, settling himself comfortably. His well-behaved demeanor drew admiring glances from a few nearby patrons, who smiled at the furry friend. As Ethan was getting comfortable, a waitress approached their table. Her name tag identified her as Maggie, and she carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who truly enjoyed their job. "Good afternoon," she greeted them warmly, her professional demeanor softening as she noticed Max. "Oh, aren't you a handsome fellow?" she added, addressing the dog directly. Ethan smiled, appreciating her friendly attitude. "He certainly is," he agreed. "I hope it's all right that he's up here with me." Maggie waved off his concern. "As long as he's well behaved, we're happy to have him. Now, what can I get for you today?" Ethan considered for a moment. "I'll have a coffee and a steak sandwich, please. And could I get an additional unsalted steak portion for my friend here?" He gestured toward Max, who perked up at the mention of food. Maggie nodded, jotting down the order efficiently. "Of course. 1 coffee, 1 steak sandwich, and a special order for the distinguished gentleman," she said with a wink toward Max. "I'll have that right out for you." As Maggie headed back inside to place their order, Ethan settled in to wait. He pulled out his script from an inner pocket of his jacket, spreading it out on the table while Max lounged contentedly beside him. Ethan alternated between reviewing his lines and giving Max gentle pats, dividing his attention between work and his canine companion. "Just a little longer, buddy," he murmured, rubbing the dog's head affectionately. "Food's coming soon." True to her word, Maggie returned shortly with their order. "Here's your coffee," she said, placing the cup in front of Ethan. The kitchen is just finishing up your steak and your friend's special order. It'll be out in just a moment." Ethan thanked her as the aroma of freshly brewed coffee roused him from his haze, making his stomach growl. Just as he was about to take a sip, a nearby commotion shattered the peaceful atmosphere. A burly man in a biker vest was passing their table, his face twisted in a sneer. "Filthy animals," he muttered loud enough for Ethan to hear. "Sitting at the table like they're people." Before Ethan could react, the man's boot lashed out, catching Max in the side. The dog let out a pained whimper that quickly turned into defensive barking, drawing the attention of everyone on the patio. In an instant, the peaceful scene had transformed into one of conflict, with Max's distressed barking serving as a stark reminder of how quickly situations could change. Ethan's muscles tensed, his relaxed demeanor evaporating as he prepared to confront this unexpected threat. Ethan's reaction was instantaneous. He sprang to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the patio floor. His body was taut with anger, his eyes blazing as he confronted the biker. The sudden movement drew the attention of everyone on the patio, creating a palpable tension in the air. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Ethan demanded, his voice low and dangerous. He positioned himself between Max and the aggressor, his protective instincts in full force. The biker, momentarily taken aback by Ethan's swift response, took a step back from Max's growling, but maintained his aggressive stance. He spat on the ground, his face contorted with disgust. "Control your beast," he snarled. "How dare it show its teeth to a man?" Ethan's hand found its way to Max's back, his touch gentle but firm, helping to calm the agitated dog. The contrast between Ethan's soothing presence and the biker's hostility was stark. "Max only reacts to threats," Ethan said, his voice steady despite his anger. "You're the one who provoked him. He's never hurt anyone unless they hurt him first." The biker's face twisted into a mocking sneer. "Coward dog, coward owner," he taunted, his words dripping with contempt. For a brief moment, Ethan's composure slipped. His hand shot out, grabbing the front of the biker's vest. The crowd around them gasped, the tension ratcheting up another notch, but just as quickly as it happened, Ethan caught himself. He was acutely aware of the watching crowd, of Maggie's worried face as she approached with their food. Ethan released his grip on the vest, taking a deep breath to center himself. The biker, sensing Ethan's restraint, seized the moment to make his threat. "You'll pay for this," he growled, dusting off the spot where Ethan had grabbed him. "Both of you." With a final sneer, he turned and walked away, his heavy boots thudding against the patio floor. As the biker retreated, Ethan's trained actor's eye couldn't help but notice details about his appearance. The vest the man wore bore a distinctive insignia, a snarling tiger with extended claws. It was the same design he had seen on the troublemakers outside Iron and Ash earlier. The connection sent a chill down his spine, but he pushed the thought aside for the moment. Ethan turned his attention back to Max, checking the dog over for any signs of injury. Finding none, he let out a sigh of relief. The smell of the freshly grilled sandwich pulled him back to reality, reminding him of the purpose of their stop. Maggie approached cautiously, concern etched on her face. "I'm so sorry about that," she said, setting down the plates. "Are you both all right?" Ethan nodded, offering her a reassuring smile. "We're fine. I'm sorry for the commotion." Maggie shook her head. "Don't apologize. Those bikers have been harassing our customers for weeks now in this neighborhood. This is the first time one has gone after an animal. Ethan's jaw tightened as he processed her words. He glanced down at Max, who was now calmly eating his steak portion, seemingly unfazed by the earlier altercation. "They won't get away with this," Ethan said quietly, more to himself than to Maggie. "Not if I have anything to say about it." As Ethan sat back down, his mind raced. He knew he couldn't let this slide. The biker's threat lingered in the air, and Ethan was determined to protect Max and ensure their safety. But for now, he focused on the present, enjoying the simple pleasure of a good meal with his loyal companion by his side. The rest of their walk would have to wait. Ethan had a feeling this was far from over. At 3:57 p.m., Emily, a 28-year-old waitress at the local cafe, glanced around nervously before leaning in and lowering her voice. "The owner's been trying to get more security, but it's not easy," she said, her eyes darting toward the door. As she excused herself to attend to another table, 35-year-old Jake settled back into his chair. The earlier confrontation with the biker had left him more shaken than he cared to admit. He looked down at his turkey sandwich, suddenly aware of how hungry he was. Maybe that was why he had reacted so impulsively to the biker's provocation. Max, his loyal 4-year-old golden retriever, seemed to have recovered from the shock. His nose twitched at the scent of Jake's sandwich, and a string of drool formed at the corner of his mouth. Jake couldn't help but chuckle at the sight. "All right, buddy," he said, reaching for the dog's plate. "Let's enjoy our meal. We've earned it after that excitement." As they ate, Jake found his thoughts drifting back to the biker and his ominous threat. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that somehow their paths would cross again before the day was done. But for now, he pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with his four-legged friend. When Jake finished the last bite of his sandwich, he glanced at his watch and realized with a start that their break was nearly over. Time had slipped away faster than he'd anticipated, and they needed to head back to the film set soon. "Looks like we need to get going, Max," Jake said, giving the dog an affectionate pat. "But first I need to use the restroom. Mind waiting for me?" Max tilted his head as if considering the question, then settled back into his chair with a contented sigh. Jake couldn't help but smile at the dog's seemingly human-like response. Standing up, he carefully secured Max's leash to the table leg. He caught Emily's eye as she passed by with a tray of drinks for another table. "Would you mind keeping an eye on him for a moment?" he asked. "I'll just be a few minutes." Emily nodded, her smile warm. "Of course, no problem at all." Jake made his way inside the cafe, weaving through the tables to the back, where a small sign indicated the restrooms. To his dismay, he found a line of people waiting. He considered going back outside to wait, but the pressure in his bladder convinced him otherwise. He'd just have to be as quick as possible. The minutes ticked by slowly as Jake waited his turn, his foot tapping impatiently. He couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease, a sense that he shouldn't have left Max alone. But that was ridiculous, wasn't it? The dog was perfectly safe in Emily's care. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably no more than 10 minutes, Jake emerged from the restroom. He hurried back outside, eager to collect Max and head back to the set. As he stepped onto the patio, his heart sank. Max was alone at the table. Emily nowhere in sight. But that wasn't what sent a chill down Jake's spine. It was the sight of Max, clearly in distress, struggling to breathe. Jake rushed to the dog's side, his mind racing. Max was choking, his body heaving as he tried desperately to expel something from his throat. Panic threatened to overwhelm Jake, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Water," he called out, his voice tight with urgency. "I need water, quickly." A waitress, not Emily, but a younger girl with a name tag that read Lila, responded promptly, bringing over a bottle of water. With careful precision, Jake administered the water, holding Max's jaw up to help whatever was stuck pass through. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a final heave, Max managed to swallow. The immediate crisis passed, but the dog still looked distressed, his eyes unfocused and his tail drooping. It was at this moment that Emily returned, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," she said, breathless. "The kitchen needed me urgently, but I asked Lila to watch him." Lila, looking nervous, stepped forward. "There was a man here," she said hesitantly. "He seemed friendly. He fed the dog a sausage. I thought it was okay." As Lila described the man, bearded with chubby cheeks, a mohawk, and wearing leather gloves and a vest with a tiger claw insignia, Jake felt his blood run cold. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. "Is there a vet nearby?" Jake asked urgently, his eyes darting between Emily and Lila. He was already fearing that something else was inside the sausage. They exchanged a quick glance before Emily nodded. "There's one about 3 blocks from here," she said, pointing down the street. "Take a left at the next intersection. You can't miss it." Jake nodded, his mind already racing ahead. He left a generous tip on the table, along with money for the bottled water, and prepared to leave. But as he stood up, Max suddenly collapsed, his legs giving out beneath him. The dog's condition was deteriorating rapidly. His tail hung limp, his eyes were becoming unfocused, and distressed whimpers escaped his throat. Jake knew they didn't have a moment to lose. Without hesitation, he scooped Max into his arms. The dog's substantial weight made the task challenging, but adrenaline lent Jake strength. With a final nod of thanks to the shocked waitresses, he set off at a run toward the veterinary clinic, praying they wouldn't be too late. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he raced through the streets of Brooklyn Heights, Max's substantial weight cradled in his arms. The urgency of the situation was evident in his rapid pace and focused determination. Passers-by turned to stare at the sight of a man carrying a large golden retriever, but Jake paid them no mind. His entire world had narrowed down to the precious cargo in his arms and the desperate need to reach the veterinary clinic. The 3 blocks to the clinic felt like miles. Sweat beaded on Jake's forehead, both from exertion and fear. Max's condition seemed to worsen with each passing moment, his whimpers growing weaker, his body becoming increasingly limp. Finally, the clinic came into view, its white facade and blue cross sign like a beacon of hope. Jake burst through the doors, his voice hoarse as he called out, "Please, I need help. My dog's been poisoned." The reception area erupted into action. A woman in scrubs, her name tag identified her as Dr. Harper, quickly took charge of the situation. "Bring him this way," she directed, leading Jake to an examination room. "Put him on the table." Jake gently laid Max on the cold metal surface, his hands lingering for a moment on the dog's fur. Dr. Harper immediately began her examination, her movements quick and precise. "Can you tell me what happened?" she asked, her eyes never leaving Max as she checked his vital signs. Jake recounted the events at the cafe as best he could, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Someone fed him something, a sausage, I think, but it must have been laced with something. He started choking, and then he just collapsed. Dr. Harper nodded, her face grave. His pupils are dilated, and his symptoms are consistent with poisoning, likely drug-related, given how quickly it's affecting him. She turned to a nearby nurse. We need to run blood tests immediately to identify the substance and administer an antidote. As the nurse hurried to carry out the order, Dr. Harper outlined her immediate treatment plan. We're going to start by giving him activated charcoal to neutralize the poison, she explained. We'll also put him on IV fluids to flush the toxins and help stabilize his condition while we wait for the test results. Jake nodded, trying to process the information through his worry. Do whatever you need to do, he said. Just please save him. As the medical team worked on Max, Jake found himself ushered back to the waiting room. The reality of the situation began to sink in, and with it came the realization that he needed to inform the film crew about what had happened. With shaking hands, he pulled out his phone and dialed the director's number. The conversation was brief but weighty. Jake explained the situation, his voice catching as he relayed the seriousness of Max's condition. The director's initial frustration at the disruption to the shooting schedule quickly gave way to concern. Don't worry about the shoot, the director assured him. We'll reschedule. Just take care of Max, Jake, and make sure you document everything. We might need it for insurance or legal reasons. After ending the call, Jake arranged for the dog handler to come to the clinic. He knew they would need to properly document the incident, both for the production and in case they decided to pursue legal action against Max's attacker. As he settled in for what promised to be an anxious wait, Jake couldn't help but reflect on how quickly this day had spiraled out of control. What had started as a simple walk had turned into a life-or-death situation. And somewhere out there, the man responsible for this was still free. Jake's jaw clenched at the thought. He had always prided himself on being a peaceful person, on choosing diplomacy over confrontation. But in this moment, as he waited to hear if Max would survive, he found himself wrestling with a desire for justice, or was it vengeance, that he had rarely experienced before. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one feeling like an eternity as Jake waited for news about Max's condition. The sterile smell of the clinic, the muted sounds of other animals, and the quiet efficiency of the staff all blended into a surreal backdrop to his worried thoughts. All he could do now was wait and hope that they had reached help in time. Back at the door, Jake muttered under his breath, his voice barely louder than a whisper. The woman who was supposed to be standing here had been rushed to the hospital. Jake, a 34-year-old actor, was stunned by the news. It had to be the same young woman who had greeted him earlier. He leaned in, lowering his voice even further. How long has this been going on? He asked the bartender, whose shoulders slumped in defeat. Months, the bartender replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. It's gotten worse lately. Last month, they broke my nose and 2 of my fingers when I tried to stop them from harassing a customer. He unconsciously clenched his hand, wincing at the memory. I've been thinking about quitting, he admitted. Jake's eyes narrowed. The bartender, a man in his late 40s named Mike, continued. Nessa, one of the waitresses, already put in her resignation, but the owner made her stay until they found a replacement. He said he needed everyone to stick around to handle this mess. Mike gestured vaguely toward the bar where a group of bikers was causing trouble. Jake frowned, his sense of injustice growing. This isn't right, he said firmly. "You shouldn't have to put yourself in danger like this." Mike shrugged helplessly. "The owner knows where I live. I'm scared of what might happen if I just walk away." As they spoke, Jake's eyes drifted toward the grimy windows of the bar. Through the dirty glass, he could see the beginnings of another scuffle. The bikers were aggressively confronting other patrons, their behavior a stark contrast to the trembling staff. The scene confirmed what Jake had begun to suspect. A direct confrontation would be unwise, even dangerous, not just for him, but for the staff and other customers who might get caught in the crossfire. A plan began to form in Jake's mind. He had connections, people who could handle this situation officially and safely. One name stood out: Sheriff Hank Morrison, a trusted friend with the authority and experience to deal with situations like this. Jake turned back to Mike, his decision made. "Listen, I think I know someone who can help." Mike nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Who are you going to call?" Jake gave a reassuring smile. "Someone who can end this legally and safely. Keep your head down and stay safe. Help is on the way." With that, Jake stepped out of the bar and pulled out his phone. He dialed Sheriff Hank Morrison's number, his fingers moving with purpose. When the call connected, Jake's voice was low and urgent. "Hank, it's Jake. I need your help with a situation at Iron and Ash in Brooklyn Heights." The conversation was brief but tense. Jake quickly summarized the day's events, his voice tight with controlled urgency as he described the attack on Mike and the possibility of illegal substances being present. "The bikers poisoned a dog earlier," Jake explained, his eyes never leaving the bar's entrance. "They've got something on them. I'm sure of it. I'm at the location now." Sheriff Morrison's voice came through the phone, calm but serious. "I understand, Jake. Don't do anything rash. Stay put and don't intervene. We'll be there soon." Jake agreed, ending the call with a sense of relief. He trusted Hank to handle the situation professionally and efficiently. For now, all he had to do was wait. As he put his phone away, Jake noticed Mike looking at him with a mix of hope and fear. The man hesitated before approaching, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you call the cops?" Jake nodded, but before he could say more, Mike's face twisted in panic. "No, you can't. The business will be ruined if the cops show up. What will the owner do?" Jake interrupted him, gently but firmly. "Think about what you're saying. What's left to protect here? A business that can't even guarantee the basic safety of its employees? That allows criminals to threaten the community?" Mike fell silent, unable to respond. Jake continued, his voice softer now. "There should be real security here, not waitresses or bartenders like you putting themselves in danger. This isn't right, and you know it." The man nodded slowly, the truth of Jake's words sinking in. "You're right," he admitted quietly. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant wail of sirens. Within minutes, several police cars arrived on the scene. The officers moved with tactical precision, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Jake watched as they efficiently secured the bar, the element of surprise working in their favor. Through the window, he could see the chaos inside as tables were overturned and customers were shoved aside. The search of the premises was thorough and methodical. Jake overheard snippets of conversation as the officers emerged from the bar, discussing the significant stash of illegal substances they had discovered. It wasn't just personal use. They had found evidence of organized distribution. As the arrests began, Jake felt a mix of emotions: relief that justice was being served, satisfaction that the threat to the community had been neutralized, and a lingering anger over what had happened to Buddy, the dog. The sequence of arrests unfolded with professional efficiency. Each suspect was properly secured, their rights read as they were led to waiting police cars. The flashing lights cast an eerie glow over the scene, drawing the attention of onlookers. Jake suddenly realized the crowd was growing, and the risk of being recognized was high. He slipped on a pair of sunglasses. He had done what he came to do, and now it was time to step back and let the law handle the rest. As he watched the last of the bikers being led away, Jake's thoughts turned to Buddy. With the immediate threat neutralized, he could focus on what really mattered, ensuring the dog's recovery and safe return to the film set. With one last look at the scene unfolding before him, Jake turned and began walking toward the veterinary clinic. The day's events had taken an unexpected turn, but he felt a sense of relief knowing that those responsible for Buddy's condition would face justice. As Jake walked toward the clinic, his path unexpectedly crossed with one of the arrested bikers. The man's eyes widened in recognition, a mix of anger and fear flashing across his face. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as they locked eyes. Jake felt a surge of emotions: anger, disgust, but also an odd sense of pity for someone whose life had led them to this point. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before speaking. "You know," Jake said, his voice low and controlled, "there's a saying I read recently that seems fitting right now. Don't mess with someone else's dog." He paused, letting the words sink in. This is real life, and actions have real consequences. The biker's face twisted in anger. "I hope that dog dies," he spat, struggling against the officer restraining him. Jake's expression remained impassive, but his eyes hardened. "You won't get the chance, and now you'll have plenty of time to think about why hurting an innocent animal seemed like a good idea." With that, Jake turned and walked away, never looking back, even as the biker shouted obscenities behind him. The officers quickly silenced the man, pushing him into the back of a police car. As Jake continued his walk to the veterinary clinic, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The brief confrontation had brought a sense of closure. He had faced the man responsible for Buddy's condition, and had done so without resorting to violence or revenge. The streets that had earlier witnessed Jake rushing in with an injured friend now saw his measured return. The tension that had driven him earlier had been replaced by a quiet determination to see Buddy recover. When Jake arrived at the clinic, he found Dr. Harper waiting for him. Her face broke into a tired but reassuring smile. "Mr. Carter," she greeted him, "I'm happy to report that Buddy is stable. The antidote and supportive care are working. We've managed to counteract most of the toxin's effects." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. "That's great news, Doctor. What's the next step?" Dr. Harper led him to the recovery area where Buddy was resting. The dog lay on a soft bed, surrounded by monitors. Despite the tubes and wires, Buddy's tail wagged weakly at the sight of Jake. "Hey, Buddy," Jake said, kneeling to meet the dog at eye level. "You're gonna be okay. We got the bad guys." Dr. Harper smiled at the interaction. "If there are no complications, Buddy can go home tomorrow. You'll need to continue the medication and follow the special diet, but his prognosis is good." Jake nodded, mentally noting the instructions. "I'll be here first thing in the morning," he promised. "My hotel's nearby, so I can get here quickly if anything changes." As they went over the details of Buddy's care and arranged for pickup the next day, Jake's attention was drawn to a small TV in the reception area. The local news was covering the arrests at Iron and Ash, highlighting the charges against the biker gang members, with a special focus on animal cruelty. The report mentioned that detectives had found traces of dog fur on one of the men's boots, and while official confirmation was still pending, tests were being conducted to confirm the abuse. Jake felt a sense of satisfaction as he watched the report. Justice was being served, and the neighborhood would be safer. Relieved that the news didn't mention his involvement, Jake knew Sheriff Hank had kept his promise of discretion. The report also mentioned that the owner of Iron and Ash was under investigation, and the bar would remain closed until further notice. It seemed the day's events would lead to positive changes for the entire community. As Jake prepared to leave the clinic, he felt a complex mix of emotions. The day had been a roller coaster of fear, anger, and finally relief. But more than that, he felt a connection to Buddy that went beyond their on-screen relationship. They had been through something real together, something that would undoubtedly translate into a more authentic performance when they returned to the set. With a final compliment to Buddy and a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Harper and her team, Jake stepped outside. The early evening air was cool, and the streets of Brooklyn Heights seemed different, somehow. As if resolving the conflict at Iron and Ash had shifted the neighborhood's atmosphere. As he walked back to his hotel, Jake reflected on the day's events. What had started as a simple walk to help him get into character had turned into a fight for survival. One that had tested not just his acting skills, but his real-life courage and determination. Jake couldn't help but think about how this experience would affect their on-screen chemistry. The shared challenge had created a bond that went beyond the script, a genuine trust and affection that would surely translate into more authentic performances. When he reached his hotel, Jake's phone rang. The screen displayed the name of the film's producer. Taking a deep breath, Jake answered the call. "Jake," the producer's voice was a mix of concern and frustration. "How's Buddy?" Jake quickly summarized Buddy's condition and positive prognosis, emphasizing the dog's expected recovery. As he spoke, he could almost hear the gears turning in the producer's head, calculating the impact on their filming schedule. "This is going to set us back," the producer said with a sigh. "We'll need to adjust the shooting sequence, maybe move some scenes without Buddy to the front of the schedule." "I understand," Jake replied. "But Buddy's health has to come first. We can't rush his recovery." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when the producer spoke again, his voice was softer. "You're right, of course. We'll make it work. The vet said he'll be ready to return in a few days." "That's the hope," Jake confirmed. "I'll pick him up tomorrow, and we'll follow the vet's instructions for his care and recovery." They discussed logistics for a few more minutes, finalizing a temporary plan to reshuffle the shooting schedule. The producer's willingness to prioritize Buddy's health over the immediate demands of filming was a pleasant surprise to Jake, a sign of the industry's shifting attitude toward animal actors. As Jake ended the call and stepped into the hotel lobby, his phone buzzed with a text from Sheriff Hank Morrison. "Operation successful. All suspects in custody. Evidence secured. Your involvement remains confidential. Well done, Jake." A small smile crossed Jake's face as he read the message. Hank's efficient handling of the situation and his discretion were exactly why Jake had turned to him for help. It was a relief to know that the threat to Buddy and the neighborhood had been neutralized without compromising Jake's privacy or the film's production. The adventure might have been over, but Jake knew his journey with Buddy was far from finished. Tomorrow would bring a new day, new scenes to shoot, and a deeper bond with his four-legged co-star. As sleep finally claimed him, Jake's face wore a small, contented smile, reflecting the satisfaction that came from facing adversity and emerging stronger on the other side. The streets of Brooklyn Heights, once tense and foreboding, now felt lighter, as if the resolution at Iron and Ash had lifted a collective weight. Jake's thoughts lingered on Buddy and the unexpected bond they had formed. What had begun as a simple walk to help him get into character had become a shared struggle, one that would undoubtedly deepen their on-screen connection. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake felt a quiet confidence. They had faced the worst together, and now they were ready for whatever came next.